how big a role do you think psychedelics have played in prehistory?
Well, it's one of the reasons why we should never look for ourselves in the past, because we've had the horrific, vicious, evil thing called the war on drugs for the past 50+ years, which is gradually going away, thank God. You know, but we're a culture that's hated psychedelics since the time of Richard Nixon, and we kind of just assume that every culture in antiquity also hated psychedelics. No, they didn't. They were deeply involved with psychedelics. Whether you're talking about the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece,
what's that?
It was a temple, the Temple of Eleusis. It stands just outside of Athens in Greece, what's left of it. They served up a potion to all the initiates. And the initiates included Sophocles, Pindar, Plato himself. All the great minds of ancient world went to Eleusis. They were given this brew, which was called the kykeon. Then they went down into these deep chambers underneath the Temple of Eleusis. And then they had extraordinary experiences, which gave them revelations about the nature of reality. They ceased to fear death. They knew that they knew that death was not the end. They had no fear of death anymore after they'd had this experience. Sounds a lot like a psychedelic experience. And then we have the work that's been done on that brew. And that brew was made, we're told it was made from barley, mint, and water. But what grows on barley is Claviceps paspali, which is an LSD-like fungus.
I love it.
Ergot,
I love it.
which is soluble in water. There are ergots that are very dangerous, but there are also ergot. Ergot is the class of fungus to which this belongs. Okay. And some of them are extremely dangerous. But this one is soluble in water, is not dangerous, and is basically LSD. They were drinking LSD in the Temple of Eleusis, and they were having revelations about the meaning of life, and they were creating great philosophy and brilliant ideas at the time. It's, of course, massively connected to this surge of intellectual activity in ancient Greece. But ayahuasca,
or even before we get to ayahuasca, what were we discussing earlier? Is the pineal gland that you see represented in like as the pine cone? I saw it when I was in the Vatican. There's
one at the Vatican. They're pictured in many of the Mesopotamian reliefs that show the 7 sages. They're holding a pine cone to somebody's head, you know.
Yeah.
There's a suggestion that the pineal gland, it has been suggested that the pineal gland secretes dimethyltryptamine.
DMT.
DMT. I think that the more recent work on that suggests it probably doesn't, but that it's a locus for endogenous. All of us have DMT in our bodies. We're all illegal here.
Yeah, we're all carriers.
We're all carriers. It's a natural brain hormone.
Yeah.
The exact question of where in the body it's generated, some people think it might be the lungs these days. Wherever it is, it's there,
yeah.
And the pineal is associated with it in a number of ways, and it's associated. The pineal is the third eye. It was an eye. The pineal was an eye. It still is in some amphibians.
That's why it's called the third eye.
It has a lens, a cornea, and a retina. We've
just evolved out of it.
Yeah, it's gone deeper into the brain. It's no longer light sensitive, but it's still arguably the third eye. So the connection of the pineal and DMT is not absolutely clear, but there is likely some connection.
Okay, so the idea of us looking for ourselves in the past, we're looking at how people build the pyramids, and we're going, well, you know, we have these cranes. Where are your cranes?
Where are your cranes? Yeah.
Instead of looking for the things that we are not utilizing that they may utilize, which are psychedelic drugs, and maybe that gave them access to. It's stupid to use the word powers because I think it kind of dismisses everything, but maybe they give them access to some sort of like otherworldly knowledge that could have helped them create.
Well, it's an interesting discussion, actually. Yeah. The interesting thing about psychedelics, one of the many interesting things about psychedelics is, for a start, new evidence that's emerging from scientific studies. At last, psychedelics have been taken out of the closet and are being examined for their therapeutic potential. And one of the things that it's very clear that psilocybin definitely does is
mushrooms.
Mushrooms, yeah. Which is closely related to DMT. It's a kind of orally ingestible form of DMT. They promote neuroplasticity. They cause new neurons to grow in the brain. They make us smarter. Let us pay great tribute to Terence McKenna, a brilliant thinker in this field, whose book, whose stoned ape hypothesis, and whose book, The Food of the Gods, was one of the early recognitions that psychedelics may have been the trigger that took our ancestor out of millions of years of boredom and put them on the path that we recognize as modern humanity.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly reasonable thing. Also, the way that psychedelics are very helpful with depression is very interesting. And why is that the case? Depression, and I speak from experience because I've suffered myself from a long period of depression back in the early 90s. Depression is a very narrow, rigid frame of mind, where you get locked into recurring patterns of thought and they're very negative, and you keep on repeating them to yourself, and you start hating yourself, and you just can't bear anything, and you're locked, and you can't escape from it. And what psychedelics seem to do is that they break that pattern. They just break it completely. And in this case, for depression, what seems to work best is a massive dose rather than microdosing. Microdosing is great as well.
You have to snap yourself out of it.
You've got to snap yourself out of it.
There's also, like, I think in depressive states, there's a narcissism wrapped into it.
Maybe so, yeah.
Not a narcissism in terms of, like, I'm the best, look at me, everything's about me, but in the negative side of that.
It's all about you still.
Yeah. And that constant negative thought. But taking and having a psychedelic experience will make you realize maybe how small you are in the grand scheme of things, or how you are intertwined into the fabric of humanity, so it can break out of that. Yeah, I like that.
Ego death will disconnect you from the universe conspiring against you.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not that important.
And if you belong to a species that has been making the same kind of stone tool without any changes for more than 1 million years, two things are happening. Clearly, cultural information is being passed down, and clearly you're locked in a very narrow frame. And then suddenly it changes, and our ancestors start producing this extraordinary cave art, this amazing cave art. Whether you're talking about that site Serrania de la Lindosa in Colombia, or whether you're talking about Lascaux Cave in France, the art is stunning. And it is classically psychedelic art. It is featuring geometry, patterns of swirling dots, zigzag lines. There's Serrania de la Lindosa, and there's one of the extinct Ice Age megafauna with the arrow pointing at it up there. The geometry that's in there, the swirling dots, the sort of interlinked chains that are shown out there on the left. These are all classic psychedelic visions. Very often, as people enter a deeply altered state of consciousness, it starts with geometry and patterns, and then it manifests more into entities. And those entities are often therianthropic in form, Greek therion, wild beast, anthropos, man. They're part human, part animal in form. Not something that you see every day, but something that is
very common in
frequently common, very common in Egyptian art, and very, very common in deeply altered states of consciousness brought on by psychedelics, is the encounter with entities who then appear to communicate with us. And again, this is where the archaeologists roll their minds, because they like to think that consciousness is entirely local to the brain. It's all manufactured by the brain, and this is just our brain on drugs. Whereas in fact, the opposite seems to be true. The brain seems to be acting as a receiver for consciousness rather than as a manufacturer of consciousness.
And what does that mean?
Well, what it means is that we have to function in a very tough physical universe. This is this world. Yeah. We got to know the laws of physics, even if we don't know them, as written down in scientific textbooks. We got to know that if we bump into that wall, it's going to hurt. Yeah. We've got to understand all of that. And naturally, our main focus is on our physical survival in this physical realm. And what's useful for that is what is rightly called the alert problem-solving state of consciousness. But there are many other states of consciousness that are available to us, and psychedelics unleash a completely different state of consciousness from the alert problem-solving state of consciousness. And in that state of consciousness, we have these extraordinary experiences, and amongst those experiences, the most important are the encounters with entities that communicate with us. Now, we have a problem in trying to decide what is going on here. A very important project just underway at Imperial College in London, and another project that's going to be launched in Colorado, I think in Denver itself, within this year, where human volunteers I hope to be one of them in Colorado. They turned me down in London because I've suffered from epilepsy since 2017. And there's no indication whatsoever that DMT would cause epilepsy, and I've smoked loads of DMT, and I know it doesn't cause epilepsy. Right. But understandably, having gone through all the legal hoops to get permission, they don't want me dying in their, in their lab. Yeah. So they've not accepted me as a volunteer, but I'm hoping I might get accepted as a volunteer here in America. What it is extended release DMT, DMTX. DMT is normally
so it's just going to keep you high?
Keep you high for an hour, yeah.
Instead of, what is DMT, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
And how long does it feel when you're high for 5 minutes, 10 minutes on DMT?
Oh, when you're in the DMT space, it can feel like forever.
So an hour is almost horrifying.
Does time not exist?
Well, yes, this is what many of the volunteers say, is that it's an alarming prospect to be in that space for an hour. They're being delivered it by drip constantly directly into their bloodstream. They can signal at any time, I've had enough, if they're really feeling overwhelmed. Yeah. But by and large, most of the volunteers went through with it. I moderated a panel with 4 of the volunteers.
Anything interesting that they say about it?
And a gentleman called Andrew Gallimore, who's invented the technology that's going to be used in Colorado. Yes, the very interesting thing is that all appeared to be meeting essentially the same entities.
These are the gnome-looking
machine elves.
They might be machine elves, they might be gnomes, they might be therianthropes, but they're playful, they're tricksy, they're tricksters, and they convey knowledge. And they're also moral teachers. This is the funny thing. They make us confront our baggage.
How so?
Well, I can say in my case, I recently had an experience with the other kind of DMT, very recently, which is 5-MeO DMT. The DMT we're talking about is NN-DMT. Okay. And that is the one that most frequently produces entity encounters and the sense of telepathic communication with entities. And science is not in a position to write that off. Quantum physics is looking at the possibility of multiple dimensions, very open to that possibility. Maybe what's happening is that our consciousness is getting retuned by DMT to gain access to dimensions of reality that are normally close to us. We think reality is just this, but actually it's all this. Mm-hmm. And in a deeply altered state of consciousness, the need for the alert problem-solving mindset is damped down, and we can open up to other areas of reality. Who knows what's going on there? But the issue is, are people learning something new in this state? This would touch on the question of whether psychedelics were helpful in energizing an ancient civilization and getting it going. I would cite the very well-known case of Kerry Mullis, the polymerase chain reaction, PCR test, which has been fundamental for all DNA work subsequently. He admitted openly that he would never have made that discovery if he hadn't taken LSD. Wow. LSD gave him that discovery.
You said you recently had an experience with the other type of
DMT. With 5-MeO.
Yeah. What was that?
It was beautiful. Okay, so 5-MeO DMT is a bit controversial because in the basic form, it comes from the secretions of a particular kind of toad. And those secretions can be scraped off and smoked directly. In that case, the smoke is quite cloudy, and you're ingesting not only the 5-MeO DMT, but other elements that are in the secretions of the toad. It's possible to have synthetic 5-MeO DMT, which is pure, which doesn't have the other elements in the secretions of the toad, and which doesn't involve killing toads. And that's the kind of 5-MeO DMT that I had, was in a pure synthetic form. I was alarmed before I did it because I've had alarming experiences on the other DMT, NN-DMT. Our facilitator helped me out and helped others in the group out by giving us MDMA first. We had.
Wow. You were getting it in, Graham.
We're totally getting it in. It's only the second time in my life I've ever experienced MDA. But
it's great,
MDMA,
isn't it?
What a great thing!
Oh, it's amazing, dude.
God,
yeah.
I mean, it's wonderful, and you feel so just overwhelmed with love. It's just such a beautiful thing. Yeah. So we had that 3 or 4 hours before we had the 5-MeO DMT, and then 3 at a time we lay down, and we first sat up to take one massive deep inhalation on the pipe, and then hold it in, and then release it, and then my wife Santha can do this and sit up. She does it with NN-DMT, and she does it. She did it with the 5-MeO as well. Just sit up, and she does these mudras. very, very present. I have to lie down. I can't be seated. I can't be standing up. I got to lie down flat. And I actually pulled on an eye mask as I was lying down. And then just the only visionary element of the 5-MeO was like a feather with an eye at the end of it. But most of it was about how I need to honor and respect and love my wife, and how I...
That was the mantra she was doing, is get you to see that.
You know, that I have to, yeah. But that I have a problem with anger. I get angry too quickly, and that anger can be very hurtful to other people, and particularly hurtful to my wife. And it showed me that, and basically said, you gotta fix this.
And how does it show it to you? Is it intuition, or
it was more intuition. It wasn't a scene of me shouting, but it was a recognition that that's what I do, and that it's harmful and useless, and it's harmful to me, and it's harmful to everybody around me.
So there's a communication with a celestial being without any words at all.
Without any words, but you get it. The other thing the other intention that I set, I had 3 goes on the pipe on that day, with about an hour and a half between each one, and on the 3rd go, my intention was more selfish. My intention was that could it help me to get rid of my migraine headaches, because I suffer very badly from migraines. In fact, there's a kind of curse. And I wanted to focus on that. Maybe there's some way that it could affect me. And I did feel, perhaps it was my imagination, but I did feel fingers massaging the back of my head where migraines often start, and then massaging my temple. And then abruptly it stopped, and it returned to the issue of my relationships. and I thought that it stopped like that because the 5-MeO DMT had fixed my migraines. But the very next day, I had another massive migraine. And I think what happened was that 5-MeO DMT was saying, actually, we can't fix this. Let's move on to something more important. It was an extraordinary experience. I wouldn't recommend anybody to do it completely alone, or any kind of DMT. I think it's important to have a responsible facilitator who's used to handling people in this state. Everybody responds in different ways. Some people can really freak out. It's not necessarily a bad thing to freak out. It's not necessarily a bad thing to feel fear. But you want somebody around who's a sitter, who understands the medicine, and who can help you through that.
You said earlier that it removes you from the problem-solving consciousness state.
Which we're normally in. We're normally thinking of the next problem we have to deal with.
How do we fit? And then I think oftentimes in that state, we're not dealing with the problems that we have internally. We're not dealing with the trauma, the relationship, those things. So it's
often we're blaming them on other people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's kind of interesting to me is even the way that you describe it, it's put a pause on those problems that we feel like we have to solve in every second to do kind of like self-work.
Inner work, yeah.
I wonder what is on the other end of self-work. Like, I wonder when you get through a lot of those things that you need to work on, where else they can take you. Because I don't think they go, you're good, see you later. Maybe you start to seek some of that. Maybe you need to deal with all of your stuff before you're ready for that higher consciousness.
Or maybe both things can happen all the time, because virtually every powerful psychedelic journey I have, and ayahuasca is certainly that, and my last ayahuasca journey was in 2019. DMT, NN-DMT more recently, and then 5-MeO DMT, they all sooner or later deal with my baggage. I carry a lot of baggage. Those of us who carry less baggage tend to have a gentler trip, but in my case, it's right in my face, and you got to deal with it.
And you keep going after it.
I keep going after it because it's very useful teaching, and I keep slipping back into bad habits.
So it's a reminder.
Yeah, and it's really important to recognize that these substances are not a magic pill, which is going to fix you overnight.
I think people use them as that.
They're not.
I think they've become trendy in a way, and I think a lot of people are seeking out ayahuasca because they're like, hey, I have this block, and if I just do this ayahuasca, it's going to fix it for me, and then it's done.
Chances are it'll be done for a few weeks, and then you'll fall back into the old pattern.
It's like a chiropractor or something.
You have to carry on the work. The real work begins after the session.
So it's a recognition of what's going on, what you have to confront. And then you have to do that work afterwards.
And then you have to do that work. But as to novelty, I mentioned Kerry Mullis and the polymerase chain reaction. The other interesting one is Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Did I mention them?
No, but they've been
they also were very forthright, particularly Wozniak, that the Apple computer would not have been invented without LSD.
Wow.
And Francis Crick, who's the discoverer of the double helix form of DNA, along with other colleagues, who was a regular user of LSD in the 1960s before it was illegal, and the 50s. And he also suggested that he first got it. He got the double helix form under the influence of LSD. So these are scientific examples of people who are making a quantum leap forward in knowledge as a result of their psychedelic experiences, not as a result of their alert problem-solving state of consciousness that we value so highly, but as a result of a completely other state of consciousness. In my case, the novelty I got was I was given a novel during 5 ayahuasca sessions in Brazil. I had never written novels before. I always write nonfiction, and I still mainly write nonfiction. But I was given a novel. I was given the whole plot of the novel, and I ended up writing that novel. The session was in 2007. I finished the novel in 2010. It was called Entangled. I had no idea that I had a novel in me, and perhaps my readers don't like it. I don't care. I found an area of myself that was new to me, and I was able to...
The entire story existed to you?
Yeah.
Now, explain to me how it existed, like plot, beginning, middle, end, or existed like, character?
I saw the principal characters, and I saw the setting. It was 2 young women, one living in the time of the Neanderthals and one living today, who were literally entangled in space and time. And it was the use of psychedelics in both times that enabled them to be entangled, and that they were brought together by an entity that they referred to. Sorry, my critics are going to go wild with this.
Just go.
They're going to drug shame me forever. But you know, they were brought together by an entity called the Blue Angel, whose purpose that there's a demon who travels through time called Sulpa, and he's seeking to destroy everything that's good about humanity, and he's doing that in 2 time frames, in the time of the Neanderthals and today. And this Blue Angel entity brings together these 2 young women in these 2 different time frames to do battle against the demon. That was the story that I was given, and that was the story that I wrote.
Do you see it like a movie, or how does that present itself to you?
I did see it a bit like a movie, yeah. Wow. I did. I saw scenes. I saw my young character from the Stone Age, Rhea, throwing stones very brilliantly at her enemies, and I saw the connection between these two women, and the sense of a supernatural battle of good against evil, against which the human story is played out, and that ultimately we humans always have a choice. We always have a choice between good and evil. It might be at a very small scale, or it might be at a very large scale. If it's at a very large scale, it can do enormous damage to human society as a whole. If it's at a very small scale, it can do enormous damage to us and those immediately close to us. But it was that sense of that happening. Anyway, I didn't have a novel in me before that.